My friends, let us begin with a question that touches every sincere seeker, whether they stand in a church, sit in meditation, or silently cry out in the night. Why does God feel distant, even when we reach with all our heart toward Him? Why is it that, after years of prayer, devotion, and earnest striving, there still remains within us a sense of separation, as though God were somewhere beyond our grasp, somewhere above, somewhere ahead, somewhere withheld? And I say to you gently, it is not because God is absent, nor because we lack faith, nor because heaven is reluctant. No, it is because we have been taught from childhood onward to search in the wrong direction. For centuries, humanity has looked outward for what exists inwardly. We have imagined God as dwelling in a far-off heaven, a distant realm to be reached after death or after worthiness has been proven. We have stretched our hands toward the sky, not realizing that the very presence for which we hunger has never been external at all. And I tell you, this misunderstanding is the single great barrier that stands between the seeker and the experience of the divine. Not God's reluctance, but our misconception. Not God's silence, but our outward gaze. Let us be very clear. The spiritual frustration so many feel, the unanswered prayers, the sense of distance, the longing for connection, is not evidence of God's refusal, but evidence of our misdirection. We seek a God who is not there, and therefore we overlook the God who is here, the God who is the very life of your consciousness, the God who is the stillness within your breath, the depth beneath your thoughts, the invisible presence that never departs and never withholds. This is the revelation which, once understood, begins to dissolve the veil of separation entirely. The presence you seek is not a future attainment. The kingdom you hope for is not a place above the clouds. It is not an experience reserved for saints, or mystics, or those born under special favor. The kingdom of heaven is within you, and it is within you at this very moment, not waiting to be created, but waiting to be recognized. So let us, in this hour, gently set aside the old assumption of a distant God. Let us lay down the weary struggle of trying to reach a presence that has never been elsewhere. Together, we will explore the truth that transforms the entire spiritual path, that God, the kingdom, the presence, the reality is closer than your own breath, nearer than your own thoughts, and more intimate than your very sense of self. This is the beginning. This is where the search ends and recognition begins. My friends, it is time we look honestly at the great error that has shaped the spiritual lives of millions. It is the belief, quiet, subtle, and often unspoken, that God is somewhere other than where you are. This assumption has woven itself into our prayers, our hopes, our religious language, and even our fears. It is the belief that God must come from somewhere to reach us, that heaven must open from above, that grace must descend from a higher realm. And the moment we accept this idea, a sense of distance arises within our consciousness, even though God has not moved and has never been separate. Let us examine this clearly. When we pray as though God must travel to us, we confess without knowing it that God is absent. When we plead for God to act, we admit unconsciously that God has not yet acted. When we beg for God to hear, we assume God has not yet heard. And in that assumption lies the entire problem. Not God's refusal, but human belief in separation. For generations we have been conditioned to think of God as out there, in the heavens, in the temple, in the future, in the reward, in the miracle that must be sent. But this belief belongs to childhood consciousness, not spiritual adulthood. It belongs to an era when humanity looked outward for everything: power, security, direction, and naturally imagined a deity who dwelt far above, governing from a distance. Yet truth is never shaped by human imagination. Truth stands eternal, regardless of our beliefs. Hear me well. The kingdom of God is not approached through distance. It is not attained by reaching outward into the sky. It is not found in the movement of your feet, nor in the geography of holy places, nor in the timeline of tomorrow's hopes. The kingdom cannot be reached as long as we insist on searching for it. For to search is to presume absence, and to presume absence is to blind ourselves to presence. This is why so many prayers feel unanswered, not because God ignores them, but because the very act of praying in this manner reinforces the belief that God is elsewhere. You cannot find what you are looking for in the wrong place. You cannot receive from a God you believe to be outside yourself, and you cannot awaken to the presence as long as you continue to cast your attention beyond your own consciousness. Let me say it plainly, lovingly, firmly. The search outward is the error. The belief in a distant deity is the veil. The expectation that God must arrive is the misunderstanding. And the moment you release this unconscious assumption, even slightly, a great shift begins. A quiet inner realization dawns. God has never been distant. God has never been elsewhere. God has never been apart from the life of your very awareness. What changes is not God, but your concept of God. And when that concept dissolves, you begin to feel what truth has always been: the gentle nearness, the ceaseless presence, the living reality of the kingdom within. And now, my friends, having set aside the belief in a distant God, let us approach the heart of the spiritual path, the true nature of the kingdom of heaven. For if we no longer imagine it as a realm beyond the stars, nor a reward waiting at the end of earthly life, then what, in truth, is this kingdom? What is this sacred reality spoken by prophets and mystics, longed for by seekers, promised by Scripture? The answer, simple yet utterly transformative, is this: the kingdom of heaven is a state of consciousness, not a place, not a destination, not a future inheritance. It is a quality of awareness, a way of seeing, a way of being that exists within the depths of your own inner life. You see, the great spiritual revolutions of history have always been inner revolutions. Jesus did not point to a geographical kingdom. Buddha did not found a territorial empire. Mystics of every age discovered the same revelation, that the divine reality is not somewhere else. It is the very foundation of consciousness itself. And Joel Goldsmith, building on this timeless stream, affirmed again and again that the kingdom is not something we travel toward, but something we awaken into. When you hear the words, "the kingdom of God is within you," do not treat them as poetry, nor as metaphor, nor as comfort for the weary soul. These words are the deepest truth ever spoken to humanity. They reveal the nature of your true being. The kingdom is the inner realm where divine presence is already functioning quietly, eternally, perfectly, whether you are aware of it or not. Let us make this clear. The outer world of form, events, circumstances, and conditions is not the kingdom. That realm is governed by change, by fluctuation, by appearance and disappearance. It rises and falls, heals and breaks, enriches and diminishes. The outer world is the world of effects, never the cause. But within you, beneath thought, beneath fear, beneath the shifting conditions, is another realm, a silent depth, a living presence, a state of consciousness untouched by external circumstance. This inner realm is the kingdom. It is the ground of peace that the world cannot disturb. It is the source of supply that no economic condition can exhaust. It is the fountain of healing that no illness can destroy. It is the guidance that no confusion can obscure. And when we speak of entering the kingdom, we are not speaking of moving vertically upward to some celestial location. We are speaking of turning inward, of awakening, of recognizing, of becoming conscious of that which has always been present. In this inner kingdom, God is not something you reach. God is something you realize, something you awaken to, something you perceive with an inner sense, beyond mind, beyond emotion, beyond the restless surface of human thought. Now listen closely. You already live in this kingdom, but you are not yet fully aware of it. The truth of your being is already anchored in divine presence, yet your attention has been absorbed by the external world. To awaken to the kingdom is simply to shift the center of your awareness from outer appearances to inner reality. It is not an achievement, but a recognition, not a striving, but a seeing. This state of consciousness, this inner kingdom, is what heals the mind, restores the heart, guides the path, and transforms the entire quality of life. And we will, in the next section, examine the one illusion that prevents most seekers from perceiving it: the belief in separation, the belief in a self apart from God. My friends, having seen that the kingdom is a state of consciousness, an inner realm rather than an outer location, we must now confront the single greatest obstacle that prevents the seeker from experiencing that kingdom in daily life. And I choose my words carefully, for this obstacle is not evil, not sin, not moral weakness. It is far simpler and far more subtle than that. It is a belief so deeply woven into human consciousness that most people never question it. And yet this one belief creates nearly every form of spiritual frustration. It is the belief in separation. Separation thinking is the quiet conviction that you exist apart from God. It is the sense that your life is yours, personal, isolated, fragile, and that God's life is somewhere else. The moment this belief is accepted, a spiritual struggle is created that no amount of effort, no amount of prayer, no amount of spiritual discipline can overcome as long as the belief remains. Let us look at this plainly. When you believe you are a separate self, you feel vulnerable, and therefore you seek protection. When you believe God is outside you, you feel empty, and therefore you seek supply. When you believe guidance must come from elsewhere, you feel lost, and therefore you seek direction. All of this effort, all of this pleading, striving, and yearning arises from the assumption that what you seek is not already present. And here lies the tragic irony. Every spiritual struggle is born from searching for what is already within. Separation thinking convinces you that peace must be gained, when in truth, peace is your natural state emerging from divine presence. It convinces you that healing must be created, when healing is the flowering of an already perfect spiritual essence. It convinces you that supply must be attracted, when supply is the expression of the infinite nature within consciousness. And it convinces you that guidance must be found, when guidance is simply the quiet knowing that arises in the stillness of inner listening. You see, separation thinking creates the illusion of spiritual distance and then urges you to fix the very distance you have imagined. It is like drawing a line in the sand and then spending your life trying to erase it. The line has no reality except the one you assign to it. Joel Goldsmith emphasized again and again that the human sense of self, this feeling of being a solitary person, cut off from the divine, is the root limitation of spiritual life. Not because God is withholding anything, but because a separated consciousness cannot perceive the fullness that is already given. It is like covering your eyes and assuming the sun has disappeared. The sun is unchanged. Only vision is obscured. Now, when you believe yourself separate, you pray as a separated being. You beg as a separated being. You fear as a separated being. And inevitably, spiritual frustration follows, because the very consciousness doing the praying is the consciousness denying the presence it seeks. But when the belief of separation softens even slightly, a new experience begins to dawn. You feel something subtle, a quiet warmth, a sense of companionship within. You begin to notice that peace does not come from your effort, but seems to rise from within you. You see unexpected solutions appear without strain. You discover that guidance emerges naturally when the mind grows still. And you realize that these moments of grace did not come from outside, they welled up from the inner kingdom that was always there. This is the turning point. This is the moment when the seeker begins to sense, however faintly, that God is not apart from them. And that realization is the beginning of spiritual freedom. In our next section, we will examine how recognition, the simple yet profound awakening to inner presence, begins dissolving separation and restoring you to the consciousness of the kingdom already within. Now, my friends, having understood that separation is not a reality but merely a belief, a veil drawn over the eyes of consciousness, we come to the heart of this work, the very foundation of Joel Goldsmith's entire ministry. And that foundation is a single spiritual activity so simple, so quiet, so unforced, that many overlook its power. It is not prayer in the traditional sense, not affirmation, not visualization, not self-persuasion. It is something far more direct, far more immediate, far more transformative. It is recognition. Recognition is the gentle awakening to what already is. It is the shift from seeking a God outside to acknowledging the presence within. It is the moment when the mind stops trying to reach, to beg, to create, to solve, and simply becomes aware. Aware of the truth that the kingdom of heaven is not something to be attained, but something to be realized. Aware that the presence of God is not something that must arrive, but something that must be recognized. Let us understand this clearly. Recognition is not forcing the mind to believe something. Recognition is not repeating holy words to convince yourself of spiritual truth. Recognition is not mental effort at all. Recognition is the still, effortless awareness that God is already where you are. That divine presence is the substance and essence of your consciousness. That the kingdom is not a future blessing, but the very ground of your being. When you pause, even for a moment, and quietly acknowledge, the kingdom of heaven is within me now, something shifts. It may be subtle, it may be gentle, it may be quiet, but something within relaxes. Something within opens. Something within ceases its restless striving. And in that moment, even if only faintly, you begin to feel the presence that was never absent. You see, recognition does not bring God closer. God cannot come closer than the life within you. Recognition simply brings your awareness into alignment with what has always been true. Recognition dissolves the illusion of separation, not by effort, not by achievement, but by awareness. Let me offer you a simple illustration. Imagine a radio tuned to static. The broadcast is already present in the room. It is filling the space. It is available at every moment. But the receiver is tuned to noise. The moment you turn the dial gently, quietly, the static disappears and the broadcast becomes clear. Nothing entered the room, nothing came from elsewhere. You simply tuned into what was already here. This is recognition, a tuning of consciousness, a shift from noise to presence, a movement from outer fixation to inner awareness. When recognition becomes the foundation of your spiritual life, fear begins to loosen its grip, not because you fight it, but because fear cannot survive in the light of inner presence. Lack begins to dissolve, not because you manipulate conditions, but because supply flows from the divine nature of consciousness itself. Guidance becomes natural, because clarity arises when the mind is still. Healing begins not as magic, but as the unveiling of the wholeness already present within your true being. But all of this begins with recognition, not achievement, recognition, not effort, recognition, not striving, recognition. It is the simplest act in the world, yet it is the most profound. The act of acknowledging that what you seek is already here, already within, already the truth of your own consciousness. And in the next section, we will explore how this recognition becomes a practical, living experience throughout the movements of daily life, how it can be brought into moments of fear, decisions, challenges, and ordinary tasks until the kingdom within becomes your steady and natural dwelling place. My friends, recognition must not remain a beautiful idea, admired from afar like a distant mountain. It must become the very atmosphere in which you live. It must become the quiet movement of awareness that accompanies you through each hour, each task, each moment of your day. For if the kingdom of heaven is within you, then spiritual life is not reserved for sacred settings, it is lived in the midst of ordinary activity. Joel Goldsmith called this practical mysticism. And it is here that the teaching becomes alive, tangible, real. Practical mysticism begins with a simple truth. You need not withdraw from life to find God. You need only withdraw your attention from the belief that life exists apart from God. The presence is where you are, not where you escape to. So the question is never, how can I find time for spirituality? The true question is, how can I bring recognition into the moments I already live? Let us explore how this unfolds. When you rise in the morning, before the mind leaps into its familiar parade of duties and concerns, pause. Even for 10 seconds, pause. And in that pause, recognize the presence is here, the kingdom is within me. This day is not separate from God's life. You will be amazed at how such a simple acknowledgement can transform the entire texture of your morning. It is not the length of the practice, but the quality of the awareness that matters. As you move through your day, countless opportunities for recognition will arise. A moment of irritation, a moment of uncertainty, a moment of fear. These moments are not obstacles, they are invitations, calls to turn inward, to shift from outer reaction to inner awareness. Instead of responding reflexively, take a breath. Withdraw your gaze from the appearance that troubles you and quietly acknowledge the truth. Right here, within this very moment, the kingdom of heaven is present. Do not struggle. Do not try to make the experience feel spiritual. Simply recognize. And in that recognition, something subtle begins to happen. You find yourself less entangled in emotion, less driven by fear, less pulled by the world of appearances. The situation may not change immediately, but your consciousness begins to rest in a deeper place. And from that deeper place, response replaces reaction, clarity replaces confusion, Peace replaces turmoil. You may wonder how this applies to moments of real challenge, times when the body feels weak, or finances feel strained, or relationships feel tense. But it is precisely in these moments that inner turning is most powerful. When fear arises, do not battle it. Do not attempt to spiritually fix the outer condition. Instead, turn inward and recognize, within me, the presence remains untouched. Within me, the kingdom remains whole. It is not denial. It is not pretending the outer problem does not exist. It is simply remembering that the outer is not the whole. By directing your awareness to the inner kingdom, you open the channel through which healing, supply, and guidance can flow into visibility, not through force, but through the nature of consciousness expressing itself, and you will discover something extraordinary. Recognition does not remove you from the world. It repositions you within it. You act, but you act from peace. You decide, but you decide from clarity. You speak, but your words carry a weight of presence. You move through the day, yet the day cannot move you. Now let us address something important. This practice is not done once and perfected forever. It is a rhythm, a returning, a recentering. Some moments you will remember, other moments you will forget. Some days you will live in near constant awareness. On other days, awareness will feel far away. This, too, is part of the journey. Recognition does not demand perfection, it invites consistency. The more often you turn within, the more natural it becomes. The more you practice in small moments, the more effortlessly you will return to the inner kingdom during great challenges. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, you will find that your center of gravity shifts. You no longer live from the surface of consciousness, but from its depth. And from that depth flows a new way of experiencing life, calmer, clearer, freer, more whole. In the next section, we will explore how this inner turning, practiced faithfully, begins to produce visible changes, not as miracles imposed from the outside, but as natural expressions of a transformed consciousness. My friends, when recognition becomes a quiet habit of your heart, when turning inward becomes more natural than turning outward, you begin to witness something that cannot be explained by human logic. You begin to see that consciousness, not circumstance, governs experience. You begin to notice that as the inner life shifts, the outer world responds, rearranges, softens, and unfolds in ways that cannot be traced to mere effort or human planning. This is transformation, not imposed, not forced, not manufactured, but revealed through inner awareness. Let us look at the nature of this transformation. It does not burst forth like lightning. It dawns like light at sunrise, gradual, gentle, inevitable. At first, the changes are subtle. A moment of peace where anxiety once dominated, a calm thought where panic once rushed in, a sense of direction where confusion once tangled the mind. These small shifts are not small at all. They are signs that the kingdom within is beginning to express itself in your waking experience. You see, when the mind is absorbed in fear, frustration, or separation, it cannot perceive the divine order that is already functioning beneath the surface of life. But when recognition opens a quiet space, just a crack, the light of inner presence begins to shine through. And that light brings clarity, harmony, protection, healing, and supply in its own way, in its own time, through channels you could never have imagined. Joel Goldsmith often reminded us that spiritual work is not about changing the outer picture. It is about transforming the consciousness that beholds the picture. When consciousness changes, the picture naturally reflects that change. This is why the mystics say, as within, so without, not as a slogan, but as a living reality. Consider the one who has long struggled with unrelenting fear. They adopt recognition not as a technique, but as a way of being. Day by day, moment by moment, they turn gently inward. They do not attempt to cure fear. They simply acknowledge the presence is here. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, fear loses its authority. Not because the person fought it, but because no illusion survives long in the presence of truth. Consider the one pressed by financial strain. They have tried countless plans, countless strategies, countless attempts to manipulate conditions. Then one day, they begin practicing inner recognition. God is the substance of my being, the source of my supply. They do not use these words to attract wealth. They use them to awaken to the truth of their own spiritual identity. And in time, unexpected forms of provision appear, new opportunities, new channels, new ideas, not through struggle, but through the natural activity of consciousness expressing its own abundance. Or consider the one caught in relational conflict. They have argued, pleaded, explained, reasoned, demanded, and nothing has changed. But then they turn inward. They recognize the divine presence animating their own being, and eventually they recognize that same presence at the center of the other person. They stop trying to fix the relationship externally and begin seeing it through the lens of the inner kingdom. And in time, something shifts, not always the other person, but always the atmosphere of the relationship itself. Where tension once dominated, a measure of peace enters. And from that peace, healing begins to unfold. Do you see the pattern? Transformation does not begin by attacking the outer condition. Transformation begins when consciousness aligns with truth. The outer is the shadow, the inner is the substance. When the inner is healed, the shadow must change. This is not wishful thinking. This is not positive affirmation. This is the activity of divine law, the law of consciousness that governs all form. And when you learn to rest in the inner kingdom, you begin to witness the unfolding of this law in every area of life. But let me say this clearly. The transformation is not always dramatic. It is not always immediate. It does not always align with your mental expectations. Sometimes the greatest transformation is not the changing of circumstances, but the changing of you. Sometimes the healing is the healing of fear, not the healing of the body. Sometimes the supply is the supply of peace, not the supply of material abundance. And sometimes, in the deepest spiritual sense, the transformation is an awakening that frees you from the belief that outer conditions have the power to define you at all. Whatever form it takes, the transformation is certain when recognition becomes your way of life, for you are no longer living from the surface of human consciousness, but from the depths of spiritual reality. And in that depth, the kingdom expresses itself as harmony, as order, as peace, as wholeness. In our next section, we will explore how this expression becomes steady and continuous through the practice Goldsmith called the practice of the presence, a consistent returning to inner awareness that anchors your entire life in the kingdom within. My friends, as we approach the heart of this journey, we must understand that spiritual realization does not rest upon a single moment of insight. It is sustained through continuity, through a gentle and faithful returning to the inner presence throughout the movements of daily life. Joel Goldsmith called this the practice of the presence, not because God must be invoked, but because awareness must be renewed. The presence is always here. It is our recognition that fluctuates. You see, the mind is conditioned to wander, to drift toward appearances. toward problems, toward memories, toward fears of what may come. Left to itself, the mind will roam endlessly through the world of form, and so we cultivate a practice not to force the mind into silence, but to remind it again and again to turn toward that which is eternally true. The practice of the presence is not an effort. It is a remembrance. It is the quiet act of returning home. Let us make this very clear. The practice of the presence is not mechanical. It is not repetition of holy words for the sake of repetition. It is not a ritual to gain divine favor. It is the living relationship between your awareness and the infinite within you. Throughout your day, there will be countless invitations to turn inward. A moment of impatience, a wave of sadness, a sudden worry, a fragment of doubt. Instead of reacting from habit, take these moments as opportunities. Pause, even briefly. Turn your attention inward and recognize the presence is here. Do not attempt to feel spiritual. Do not attempt to create an experience. Simply acknowledge what is. And if you forget, if you are swept away in the momentum of the day, do not judge yourself. Do not condemn yourself. Do not say, I failed. For awareness is not kept through force. It is kept through love. Simply return, and then return again and again. This is the rhythm of spiritual life. Forgetting and remembering, contracting and expanding, drifting outward and returning inward. Over time, the returning becomes more frequent, more natural, more effortless. Eventually, the practice of the presence becomes the background of your consciousness. Even as you speak, as you work, as you make decisions, as you care for others, a quiet awareness remains an inner stillness beneath the outer activity. You begin to live with two levels of awareness simultaneously, functioning effectively in the world while resting inwardly in the presence. This is the beginning of living in the kingdom while still appearing in the realm of human experience. Now, understand something essential. The practice of the presence is not merely a tool for times of trouble. It is not a spiritual emergency button. It is a way of life. It is the atmosphere in which you breathe, the foundation from which you act, the inner sanctuary you carry with you wherever you go. Practice it in moments of peace, not only in moments of distress. Recognize the presence in the quiet of the morning, in the stillness of night, and especially in the ordinary moments, in washing the dishes, in walking down the street, in listening to a friend, in doing your work. When the practice becomes continuous, something profound unfolds. The presence that you once visited occasionally becomes a presence you dwell in. The kingdom that felt like a momentary glimpse becomes a living state of consciousness. You find that peace no longer comes and goes. It deepens. Guidance no longer feels occasional. It becomes a steady intuition. Strength arises where weakness once lived. Clarity replaces confusion. And love, impersonal, unconditional, radiant love flows naturally from the depths of your being. This is not the result of effort. It is the result of abiding in the truth that God is the life of your consciousness, abiding in the awareness that you are not separate, abiding in the kingdom within. And with this continuous practice, you discover something extraordinary. The presence begins to live you. Your actions arise from it. Your words are shaped by it. Your decisions flow through it. You are no longer trying to practice the presence. The presence is practicing you. In our next and final section, we will gather all of this into a unified vision and bring the journey to its natural resting place. The realization that the kingdom within you is not a promise, not a possibility, but an ever-present reality awaiting your recognition. My friends, As we bring this journey to its quiet completion, let us gather together the threads we have woven, threads that, when seen as one tapestry, reveal the essence of the spiritual path. For everything we have explored in these hours leads to a single, liberating realization. You have never been separate from God, and the kingdom you have sought all your life has always been within your own consciousness. This is not a lofty idea for the mystic alone. It is the truth of your being. You may have believed yourself distant. You may have felt abandoned. You may have struggled and prayed and waited for heaven to open. But all the while, the presence was where it has always been, at the center of your own awareness, hidden only by the veil of outward searching. Let us release that outward search now. Let us lay down the exhausting attempt to reach a God who has never departed. The spiritual journey is not a reaching outward, but a yielding inward. It is not a striving, but a stillness. It is not a pursuit, but a recognition. When the mind stops chasing God, the heart begins to feel God. And when recognition dawns, even momentarily, the kingdom that seemed distant becomes immediate, intimate, unmistakably present. You have seen how the belief in separation creates spiritual struggle and how recognition dissolves that struggle. You have seen how inner awareness transforms outer experience, not by manipulating conditions, but by revealing the divine order already in operation. You have seen how the practice of the presence, carried into your daily life, becomes a steady rhythm of inward returning, a gentle, continual remembrance of truth. And now, as you stand at the threshold of your next step, remember this: you do not need to become something else to experience the kingdom. You do not need to accumulate spiritual merit, nor perfect your human personality, nor perform elaborate rituals. You need only pause, turn inward, and recognize the presence is here. The kingdom is within me. This recognition, repeated with sincerity and simplicity, will transform the very atmosphere of your life. Not instantly, not always dramatically, but certainly, inevitably, naturally. The kingdom expresses itself through those who dwell in remembrance. Peace deepens, guidance becomes clear, strength rises, love flows, and life begins to unfold with a harmony not of your making, but of divine origin. So, as you step back into the world, do so gently, carrying this awareness with you, not as a technique, not as a duty, but as a quiet truth that accompanies every breath. God is where I am. The kingdom is within me. The presence is my life, my source, my identity. Return to this truth in the morning. Return to it in moments of uncertainty. Return to it when life challenges you. Return to it when joy fills your heart. And return to it each night as you lay your head upon your pillow. For every act of recognition draws aside another veil until at last you see clearly what has always been so. You live in God, God lives in you, and the kingdom of heaven has never been farther than your own consciousness. With this awareness, go in peace, abide in the presence, and let the kingdom express itself through you effortlessly, naturally, eternally,